Hello and welcome to today's press gathering hosted by the Executive Intelligence Review magazine. You can find out more about our magazine, which was founded back in 1974 by Lyndon LaRouche and has been published 50 issues a year for 48 years by going to LaRouchePub and you.com, and you'll be able to find us there. Today's press availability is called Shut Down the Ukrainian Hit List, Targeting Americans and International Voices of Opposition. And we're going to go to our first speaker of the day, Colonel Richard Black, retired, former head of the U.S. Army's Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, and former Virginia State Senator. Welcome, Senator Black.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate it. Well, let me get started here. What we're going to be talking about is the fact that the U.S. Congress, through its appropriations, has been funding the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, and they are attempting, by doing this, to be able to control freedom of speech, not directly in this country, which is clearly unlawful, but by having a foreign entity do it, where they can suppress free speech using American dollars to do it overseas. I'm going to start off because, you know, the 71 people who have been put on the hit list by the Ukrainian Center for Disinformation, what I call a hit list, but basically it's a list condemning us as war criminals, info terrorists, and Russian propagandists. And so I want to make it clear that that is quite wide of the mark. And so I'm just going to give myself as an example, but I think everyone who is involved could probably give something similar. So let me just start by giving you a little of my background, because I want to make it very clear that I love my country. I've risked my life for it hundreds of times. I volunteered to fight in Vietnam. Myself and a fellow named Mike Carley, two Marine Corps pilots, became the first two volunteers from the East Coast helicopter forces to volunteer to go over to Vietnam and join the West Coast chopper pilots who were already in Vietnam. While I was there, I flew 269 combat missions. My helicopter was hit by ground fire on 4 of those flights. And in one case, bullets that were aimed directly at me just were a little bit too early, and they tore through the cowling of the cockpit just before my head, but very nearly hit me and were aimed at me. Later, during my tour of duty, I was fighting on the ground, and I heard that Mike Carley was shot through the face and killed as he flew Marine infantrymen into battle not 10 miles away from me. Now, I was flying off the carrier Iwo Jima in the South China Sea near the coast of the Philippines when the flight operations officer at the ready room briefed us in the morning, and he said that our squadron had been tasked with providing a volunteer to fight on the ground with the 1st Marine Division, which was heavily engaged in combat at the time. I immediately volunteered, went to work with the 1st Marine Division, and fought in 70, often bloody, combat patrols. During my final patrol, I was wounded, and both of my radio men were killed, Corporal Henry Smith, Lance Corporal Dennis Wargo. They died right next to me after we had launched a rubber boat assault and successfully landed on the far side of the Hoi An River under enemy fire. I served a total 32 years in uniform. First, of course, as a Marine pilot, and then later as an Army lawyer. I ran legal offices at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, Fort Ord, California, and Fort Lewis, Washington. I would typically supervise 25 to 40 Army lawyers. Finally, I retired as chief of the Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, where I testified before Congress, advised the Senate Armed Services Committee on issues of national importance, and prepared executive orders that were signed by the President of the United States. So all of that said, I'm adamantly opposed to our current wars, and especially the very, very dangerous war that we've engaged in Ukraine. I believe that the US, the UK, and the European Union have embarked on an imprudent course of action that carries a significant risk of eventually triggering an all-out nuclear war. Now, recently, Department of Homeland Security tried to establish a domestic center for countering disinformation here in the United States. Fortunately for us, Nina Jankowicz, an outrageous, narcissistic young lady, was the Department of Homeland Security pick to become agency head. Her presentation to the public was so bizarre that Americans simply recoiled at the idea of someone like her censoring their thoughts and expressions. So the U.S. Center for Disinformation, run by DHS, has temporarily been blocked because of its potential for violating Americans' First Amendment freedoms. But DHS did not limit their censorship information efforts to the United States. It has exported them into Ukraine. And by the way, Nina Jankowicz is a very accomplished Ukrainian linguist who is very deeply involved in governmental affairs there leading up to the war. It is difficult to imagine that she is not really up to her knees in the information suppression efforts of Ukraine. The Center for Countering Disinformation in Ukraine is financed by the US government under HR 7691, which is called the Additional Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2022. This provides funding for the Ukrainian government and for its Center for Countering Disinformation. Now, many of the people they've targeted, including Senator Rand Paul and former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, are very patriotic American citizens with strong, well-informed views on foreign policy. It's the intention of Department of Homeland Security and the Ukrainian Center for Disinformation to silence us. For example, there was a communique that came in the other day relative to a conference, September 1st and 2nd. This was put on by Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council and its now notorious Center for Countering Disinformation. There were representatives from NATO, from the United States State Department, and from European nations in attendance. Oleksiy Danilov, the Secretary of the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council, said, "Today, our goal is to form an international hub for countering information threats at the national and international level." He said that international law must recognize infoterrorism as a crime, and that anyone committing such a crime should be declared an information terrorist, subjected to measures that are applied to actual terrorists, which presumably includes the death penalty. It's unlawful for a US agency to fund a foreign agency in order to censor American citizens. If it's unlawful for the agency to do it here, it's unlawful for them to fund and to pay off another country to do it over there. The Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation makes available names and personal information to a murderous Kiev-based website, myrotvorets, which is suspected of encouraging such killings as the Moscow car bombing of Daria Dugina, who was the daughter of a prominent Russian activist and journalist. They have also listed on their website, which is very extensive, includes thousands of people, and they've included hundreds of children whose crime is that they posted pro-Russian Facebook entries on their computers. Now, also, while the facts remain very speculative, and I want to be clear on that, the Rio Times now sees links between Ukraine and the attempted assassination of Argentina's Vice President, Cristina Kirchner. Kirchner was criticized early on by Ukrainian sympathizers for refusing to harshly condemn Russia's special operation in Ukraine and for calling for peace talks to end the war. Now, whether the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation is involved or not, these violent acts suggest that the CCD is encouraging them. They may not be behind them, but they are certainly encouraging them. And so it's our position that the congressional appropriations must explicitly forbid Ukraine from using funds to silence patriotic American voices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel Black. And if you've just joined us, welcome to today's EIR press availability entitled Shut Down the Ukrainian Hit List, Targeting Americans and International Voices of Opposition. So you first heard from one American, now we're going to go to the international voices. And we're going to hear from, we're going to have two video presentations. I want to introduce Dragana Trifkovic from Serbia, which will be our first. And then the second will be Jens Jorgen Nielsen, Danish historian, author, and former Russia correspondent for Politiken. Now, on the second video, let me just indicate, because it's not in the video, Mr. Nielsen is one of 4 Danes that appeared on the Ukrainian list of the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation. And there was an action taken by a parliamentarian in Denmark to demand that the Danish Foreign Ministry formally answer why and if Denmark's supporting of the regime, knowing that these citizens were on the list, could be construed as supporting democracy. How do they swear that? And so he doesn't describe that in his video. So I wanted to let you know as we go to it. So we'll roll those 2 videos now.
Good afternoon, dear participants of the conference. My name is Dragana Trifkovic. I lead the Center for Geostrategic Studies in Serbia, and mainly I'm interested in geopolitical topics and conflict zones. I will be very brief. For almost 10 years now, I have been under attack by the Ukrainian regime through myrotvorets and other resources, which ultimately resulted in my inclusion on Vladimir Zelensky blacklist. We all already have enough civilization knowledge and experience to be able to recognize certain phenomena very precisely. The persecution of free thought and free speech is not democracy. It is the killing of human spirit and the rule of human fear. It is the reign of terror. Our duty is not to close our eyes, but to oppose terror and violence, because otherwise we will all wake up in the concentration camp. I would like to thank the Schiller Institute for its support and hereby give full support to my colleagues from America, Brazil, Germany, Spain, and all other countries that have been attacked by terrorist regime in Kiev. Thank you very much.
It was a very special experience for me to be on this blacklist, the Ukrainian blacklist. First, because I have not endorsed the war, I think I asked some very sensible questions. Secondly, I thought I lived in a legal society, because in the West, the politicians always are very proud of us living in a legal society. I'm not that sure anymore, because another very strange experience was a hearing in the parliament with the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jeppe Kofod. He was asked about this blacklist because 3 citizens were actually on this blacklist. So we thought he might have some comments, but actually he didn't. He didn't seem to care very much. He didn't condemn the blacklist. He didn't really say that it was a very dubious thing to have. Actually, most of the time, he talked only about victory over Putin. It was the main thing. And for me, it was a very, very strange thing, because we should defend democracy. Democracy means that citizens are allowed to ask questions to the power, to the politicians in power, of how they're using the taxpayers' money. For me, it's a very basic thing in democracy. But it seems to me, and I think it's a very scary thing about this blacklist, that it seems that politicians are changing, that the politicians in Europe, which I know the best, are changing. You know, that it seems like the rights which we think we had are not that inalienable as it seems to be. It seems that they might disappear like dew before the sun. And I think this is a very scary experience, that our foreign minister didn't seem to care at all. I also know it's a case in other European countries where I know that there's been questions in the Europe Parliament also, and in other national parliaments in Europe, and it's a very scary thing. And also, I think that the politicians seem to be very, very afraid of questions, the citizens reacting. That's why they are so obsessed with what we call Russian disinformation. But what is Russian disinformation? Is it questions about legality of war? Is it question about how we're using the money? Questions about policy towards Russia, sanctions policy, which seems to be a kind of slow suicide for Europe. At least it seems that Europeans have not only shot themselves in the foot, but maybe also in the head. And it worries me a lot that the politicians seems to be what I would consider to be not really senses. It seems that they have that has been some kind of collective, I wouldn't say madness, it's a strong word, but there's a kind of emotional impact, emotional drive in the politicians, which worries me.
If you just joined us, we want to welcome you to our press availability being done by Executive Intelligence Review. It's called Shut Down the Ukrainian Hit List, Targeting Americans and International Voices of Opposition. We're going to go now to our next speaker, and he is Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former United States Marine Corps intelligence officer. He was the chief United Nations Special Commission weapons inspector to Iraq from 1991 to 1998, charged with finding and destroying all those weapons of mass destruction. Scott has, from that time until now, made himself a nuisance, and he's very proud about it. And he's here to talk about this topic. He is one of the persons, as are the others, on the Ukrainian hit list. So, Scott, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important gathering. I want to pass my congratulations to Colonel Black and the 2 European speakers for their fine presentations. My military resume is not nearly as long or distinguished as Colonel Black's, but I am very proud of the service that I have provided to my country as a commissioned officer in the United States Marine Corps. I've served as a weapons inspector in the former Soviet Union, implementing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. I've served on the staff of General Norman Schwarzkopf during Operation Desert Storm. And for 7 years, I was a proud participant in an international effort to disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. I participated in over 45 inspections, 14 of which I was chief inspector. And these were under some very trying circumstances. I resigned in 1998 and spoke out against U.S. policy. The reason why I bring that up is, A, I'm as patriotic as it gets. Challenge my patriotism, you challenge me personally. And I'm still young enough to put some oomph behind my response. Give me a couple years and that might not be the case. But B, when I spoke out, I was heavily criticized. I was heavily criticized by my government. I was heavily criticized by the American media, by the foreign media, by just about everybody for daring to question the official narrative about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. I was called Saddam's shill. I was called much worse than that. And yet, my voice was never silenced. And I am proud of the fact that I not only continued to speak out, but more importantly, I think that history has shown that everything I said was correct, was accurate, and had people actually listened and absorbed what I was trying to speak and warn about, we might have been able to avert a war, a very costly war that has done immeasurable harm to the reputation of the United States, killed thousands of Americans, wounded tens of thousands of others, and resulted in the death, a dislocation, and otherwise disruption of the lives of millions of Iraqis and other citizens of the Middle East. So the consequences of not listening to truth when it's trying to be spoken is real. If I were speaking today about Iraq under these circumstances, if the Ukrainian government was in a position to oppose what I was trying to say, I not just would be criticized, but targeted for death. And it wouldn't just be the Ukrainian government doing it, it would be my government funding the Ukrainian government. My government allowing the Ukrainian government to try and silence me by one, imposing the chilling. There is an absolute chilling effect of being called a Russian propagandist. Now, it's curious when they say, what constitutes being a Russian propagandist? According to the Ukrainians, it includes things such as stating there were NATO bases on Ukrainian soil involved in the training of Ukrainian forces for the employment against the separatists in the Donbass. A factually correct statement, but somehow by uttering this makes me an information terrorist. We're saying things such as the mass murder that was committed in Bucha, a suburb north of Kiev, at the end of March, early April, seems to have been carried out by forces subordinated to the Ukrainian government. And I provided a detailed forensic-based analysis of why I believe this to be the case. This makes me an information terrorist. And for daring to say that it appears that the conflict in Ukraine has become a proxy conflict between the United States and NATO versus Russia on Ukrainian soil, using the Ukrainians as an extension of NATO's military capacity. Everything I've said here is factually correct. And if people want to disagree with my conclusions, I invite them or anybody to have a debate, discussion, or dialogue about this at any time. And this includes the Center for Countering Disinformation. This includes the Ukrainian government. This includes anybody in the United States government. This includes anybody in the international media. If you disagree with the conclusions I've made, if you disagree with the facts that I've used to derive these conclusions, then do the honorable thing and debate me. But don't seek to silence me through intimidation. The chilling impact of being called a Russian propagandist is real. Without naming them, they know who they are. I can tell you that 2 American-based journalistic outlets who were proud to publish me previously have decided it's not worth publishing me because of this label. They can't be affiliated with a Russian propagandist. Although literally a week prior to being released by one, an article I wrote for them was the #1 article on their website in terms of hits and attractive. But no, a Russian propagandist can't be published. What made me a Russian propagandist? Well, having the audacity, for instance, in December, prior to the initiation of Russia's military operations in Ukraine, for saying things such as, NATO lacks the military capacity to meaningfully confront Russia in Ukraine. for saying things such as the United States and the European Union have grossly overestimated the ability of economic sanctions to either deter or compel Russia to seek a different course. That if we enter into a sanctions-based conflict with Russia, it will boomerang back on us and will harm our economy far more than it harms the Russian economy. And for saying things such as the political unity that the United States believes exists in Europe and in NATO is really an illusion. And that once subjected to a significant stress test, such as, for instance, energy shortages brought on by sanctioning Russian energy, that this unity will collapse. These are predictions I made in December. Again, that used to be my job. I was an intelligence officer. My job was to make predictions based upon sound assessments of facts. Had people listened to me in December, we might have avoided the disaster that we find ourselves in today. Again, disagree with me all you want. Do not label me a Russian propagandist for telling the truth. Do not label me an information terrorist telling the truth. Do not mark me for death for telling the truth. And this isn't a message to the Ukrainian government. I don't care about them. We know who they are. We know what they are. This is a message for the United States Congress. You work for me, Chuck Schumer. You work for me, Kristen Gillibrand. You work for me, Paul Tonko. You're my congressional delegation. I have written each one of you a letter specifying the fact that you voted in favor of the aforementioned resolution authorizing funds to be allocated to Ukraine, and those funds are being used to target and intimidate American citizens, your constituents, for exercising their constitutional right of freedom of speech. And they're being targeted for death. If you think the myrotvorets webpage is a joke, ask Alexander Dugina, who just had to attend the funeral of his daughter. It's not a joke, it's real. Being labeled an information terrorist when the term terrorist is focused on as that's what they are, they need to be treated as such. You guys are American congressmen, you know how we terrorists. We just knocked one off in Kabul a little while ago. That's what we do to terrorists. And now your State Department employees, representatives, are participating in a meeting where American citizens are being labeled as information terrorists and being given the green light to be adjudicated as such. Is the United States Congress really advocating for the political murder of Americans abroad or at home? I need not tell anybody watching this broadcast the state of affairs in America today. The threat of political violence is real. And when the United States government funds and greenlights an assassination list, what does that tell people here in the United States who might happen to be politically linked to the Ukrainian government, loyal to the Ukrainian government, people who embrace the horrific ideology of Stepan Bandera? Is it open season on anybody on that list? I'd like to believe not. But we need the United States Congress to shut this down. Chuck Schumer, I'm talking to you. Christine Gillibrand, I'm talking to you. Paul Tonko, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to everybody who has taken an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to stand up and do the right thing. Shut this list down. Stop using U.S. taxpayer money to suppress the free speech of Americans and to oppose the free speech of anybody in the world who dares speak out against what's going on in Ukraine. And when I say against what's going on in Ukraine, I mean on all aspects of it. I'm not here to be pro-Russian. I'm not here to be pro-Ukrainian. I'm here to be pro-truth. And people who seek the truth should never be silenced. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Scott, as well. And if you're just joining us, you're watching the EIR Executive Intelligence Review press availability, shut down the Ukrainian hit list, targeting Americans and the international voices of opposition. We're now going to hear from Alessia Ruggieri, trade unionist from Italy, who's on the list, and Sonia van den Ende, a Dutch journalist who's also on the list.
My name is Alessia Ruggieri. I am on the CCD blacklist in Italy, Thanks to database Italia Block TV, I received the support of many people who signed the Schiller Institute petition to investigate and shut down the CCD, and encouraged me to continue my mission and the excellent work of the Schiller Institute. I end this message with a word: faith. It is faith which must prevail and not fear of those who are threatening us. Faith in God, in human values, in justice, truth, and democracy. It is democracy that they are trying to eliminate, pretending to act in its name, and cultivate doubt, because in this way you will come to truth, the truth we have been saying and will continue saying. I thank Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Hello, my name is Sonja van den Enden. I'm an independent journalist, and the Schiller Institute asked me to make a short video because maybe I cannot be on your conference. So I'm already for 6 months now covering the special operation in the Donbass. I'm situated in Moscow, Russia. I'm also on this Ukrainian death list, like many of you from the Schiller Institute, so it's very terrible. Next week I will have a conference about it, and we are discussing how to get rid of this list or how our names can be removed from the list, but I'm not for sure if they will do it, most probably not. So I am solidarity with you. We are all on this death list in the US and Europe, but I'm still covering the special operations. So if you want to follow me on VK or Twitter or on my own website, Free Syria. Good luck for the conference. Thanks. I'm standing here in Moscow now. You can see it's peaceful, beautiful here, nice flats. The people are peaceful, living normally. And there's no any sanctions what they input here from the West or from the US. So yeah, it's peaceful and people have everything. We have gas here, electricity. Maybe next week after, I don't know for sure, I will go back to the Donbass. And yeah, people, as I said before, if they're interested, they can also follow me on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is Sonja van den Ende. Well, again, good luck for your conference and hope to participate next time. Thanks.
All right, and if you just joined us again, this is the Shut Down the Ukrainian Hit List, Targeting Americans and International Voices of Opposition, Press Availability. Then I understand some people want me to announce about the Spanish language translation. It is available. I think you go to the chat and you should see there a button that you can push. We don't have translation available for cats, but as you can see, my cat's doing fine behind us. Not exactly fully attentive, but he's here. So the next speaker is Diane Sare. She's an independent candidate from the United States for the office of United States Senate, running against Chuck Schumer in New York, and she's also on the list. So, Diane.
Great. I presume you can hear me.
Yes.
So first, I'd like to thank Scott Ritter for what he said about our representatives participating in funding such a list, and also as a candidate running against Senator Schumer. One has to ask, is this some roundabout way of seeking to suppress my candidacy and to silence any debate over the policy of arming and supporting a fascist regime in Ukraine for the purpose of having a war with Russia? Now, as already referenced, the Center for Countering Disinformation held a conference September 1st and 2nd, a round table, as they called it. And according to the French chargé d'affaires to Kiev, he said, quote, Russia uses various communication channels to spread its disinformation and propaganda. Mostly these are different social networks like Facebook, Telegram, and Twitter. At the G7, we should improve coordination to fight Russian disinformation. And then, not to be outdone, we have a public relations officer from the United States Embassy to Kiev, who says, quote, "We know the scale of Russian disinformation spreading, so we use the best experience in countering Russian disinformation. We work in cooperation with Ukrainian authorities," unquote. I'd like to remind people that the Ukrainian government has banned 13 opposition parties, shut down Russian language reporting, outlawed collective bargaining for the majority of their trade unions, and just recently announced that if you vote in a referendum in a Russian-controlled territory, that you can face up to 12 years in prison. So I'm really pleased that the Americans are cooperating with such a regime. And then, not to be outdone, Molly Graham from the Canadian Embassy says, "Canada, like other democratic countries, clearly understands the threats posed by propaganda and disinformation to freedom of thought." It seems that if you believe that it was a good thing that we defeated Adolf Hitler 77 years ago, that you probably are a victim of Russian brainwashing. And as we see, if you don't reform your opinion on that matter, you will have to be liquidated. And I would say this is not an exaggeration. Now, some people might argue, well, the Center for Countering Disinformation hasn't put red X's through people's photos after they are killed, as the myrotvorets list has done that. Is it really the same? Isn't this legitimate? Are you mixing two things? And I would say no, because the myrotvorets website says that the Center for Countering Disinformation is a source for determining its targets. So it serves a convenient purpose of keeping the American and Canadian and European politicians one step removed from being associated with terrorist crimes like the car bombing which killed Daria Dubina on August 20th. On March 28th, the Center for Countering Disinformation posted a document defining information terrorism as a crime against humanity. How can asserting an idea be a crime? Presumably, if I were to assert something which is false, there is a remedy, which is prove that I'm wrong, tell the truth. If I say 3 plus 6 is 17, someone can demonstrate that that is not true and that is not correct. Therefore, it is an absurdity to equate saying something which is not true to terrorism. However, if you are going to impose a lie, then you may have to resort to brute force and terror to make it stick, because you have to ensure that anybody who would think otherwise is silenced. So I do have to say, I find it rather astounding that 77 years after the Nazis were defeated in Europe, that we have such a situation where somehow people don't think there's anything wrong with Nazism anymore, where we have assassins like the fellow who killed 10 people in Buffalo wearing the Black Sun logo that the Azov battalion shares, a Nazi logo, the Christ Church killer who killed 50 Muslims worshiping at the mosque, and the fellow who wanted to assassinate Christina Kirchner. How is it that we have a revival of the glorification of Nazism? And why is it that the United States would not vote to condemn this at the United Nations, saying that somehow it's a matter of free speech? So I would just say that if you have to resort to violence and threats and fear to silence people, then clearly you are not in a strong position, and clearly you're probably not the one who is telling the truth. And I think that if we're going to actually solve this problem, because not only should this list be shut down, and the Congress should stop funding totalitarian regimes and actions which are threatening American citizens, among others, but how do you actually defeat an ideology? And I think in that regard, what The reason why Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the Schiller Institute, were targeted is because there's been a series of dialogues of creating a new order among nations which respects the dignity of man, which would create conditions where every child had clean drinking water, electricity, decent health care, and most importantly, an ability to live in peace. And it is through those policies that such rotten ideology as the Nazis, that there is some human being on the planet inferior to yourself who can be exterminated at will, that can be defeated. So that is really what has to happen. And I, again, would reiterate that it is urgent. Every American should demand that your representative take a stand on this, and the right stand that this should be shut down. The United States should not be associated with such activity. And it does raise the question, who is running such activity? And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Diane. Again, if you just joined us, you're at the EIR Executive Intelligence Review Press Availability. Shut down the Ukrainian hit list, targeting Americans and international voices of opposition. Our next two messages come from Jeff Young of Kentucky. He is a Democratic candidate for Congress. He won his primary there, the 6th CD, but he's an independent Democrat. He's on the list. And Dr. Clifford Kirchhoff will be the second message, president of the Washington Institute for Peace and Development.
My name is Jeff Young, and I'm the Democratic nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in Kentucky's 6th Congressional District. I have been put on a list by the Ukrainian government simply for expressing my positions as a candidate. My positions are that the government of Ukraine, since 2014, has not been a democracy at all. It has been totally controlled by the US State Department, the CIA, the Pentagon, and groups of well-armed Ukrainian Nazis who have been attacking ethnic Russians for the last 8 years. The Ukrainian military has been shelling innocent civilians in Donetsk and Lugansk since 2014 and has killed over 10,000 civilians, which is more than 3 9/11s. By funding the Ukrainian government, the United States is supporting war crimes and ethnic cleansing by a dictatorship, a puppet government of the United States. And being put on a list with other Americans, including Diane Sare, a candidate for the US Senate. My own government is engaging in election meddling in this country. Unlike Andy Barr, my Republican opponent, I will never vote to send weapons to Nazis.
I'm Clifford Kirchhoff, an academic and president of the Washington Institute for Peace and Development. The American people need to know that their government has been working hand in glove with the fascist Ukraine regime to suppress the constitutionally guaranteed free speech of Americans. The US government supported the 2014 coup d'etat in the Ukraine, commonly referred to as the Maidan coup. This coup ushered in the present fascist regime, which is filled with neo-Nazi political groups, self-avowed neo-Nazi political groups. Various components of the fascist Ukraine regime are involved in what is called information warfare, designed to manipulate public opinion around the world. As part of this malign information warfare campaign, the fascist regime in Ukraine seeks to suppress the truth about the political, social, economic situation in the Ukraine and the present war there. Patriotic Americans voicing their concerns about the Ukraine and about US foreign policy are being targeted by the fascist Zelensky regime. Americans must not let this Orwellian foreign information warfare campaign undermine the US Constitution and the right of all Americans to free speech. Concerned Americans should contact their senators and their congressmen to demand that the right of all Americans to free speech be protected. Whether it is the present Ukraine situation or other foreign policy issues, Americans have a right to dissent, and Americans have a right to speak their minds. Thank you.
All right. And I just want to make something clear. We are going to be taking questions, and we'll be getting to that after our final speaker for today, who is Ray McGovern, CIA analyst for a long time, retired now, founding member of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and a scholar of many things. So Ray.
Thank you, Dennis. I have to tell you that I'm honored to be on this list of distinguished speakers who are speaking truth to power and to anyone else who listens. I'd like to put a little historical perspective on what we're doing here and go back to September of 2013, after Mr. Putin bailed Mr. Obama out and made it unnecessary for him to start yet another war, this time against Syria, and worked out a deal so Obama didn't have to do that. On almost exactly 9 years ago, on the 12th of September 2013, Mr. Putin got an op-ed in the New York Times in which he talked about the increasing trust, mind you, between not only Russia and the United States, but also personally between Mr. Putin and Mr. Obama. He did warn that he didn't agree with Mr. Obama's speeches about American exceptionalism. Okay, what happened? Well, you can't tolerate that. You can't tolerate increasing trust. And we all know that America is exceptional. I won't exactly say how, but anyhow, 6 months later, the people who need friction, who need war with Russia, mounted a coup in Kiev. Okay, coup. It was the 22nd of February 2014 and was advertised beforehand on YouTube 2.5 weeks before. Okay, now that's where it really all started, where the neocons and those who prefer to have tension with Russia raised a furor and said, aha, here. The Russians, by annexing Crimea, which came just a month later, were really expansionist and would take over the rest of Europe. So that was 6 months later. We had 6 months worth of trust. Now, at that time, Mr. Putin made a couple of speeches. And I don't want to distort or embellish on what he said, but this is important in the current context. So 10 days after the coup in Kiev, which coup, of course, is never mentioned in US media, which coup, of course, is dismissed out of hand, denied actually by academics like Tim Snyder of Yale. Well, 10 days after the coup, Putin said, I sometimes get the feeling that people in America sit in a lab and conduct experiments as if with rats without actually understanding the consequences of what they are doing. This has happened with NATO expansion, as well as the development of military structures at our borders. It happened with the deployment of ABMs, anti-ballistic missile systems in Romania, Poland, and God forbid in Ukraine. So here's Putin, just a couple more sentences. And again, this is just weeks after the coup in Kiev. So it's a long time ago. There is a limit to everything. As with Ukraine, our Western partners have crossed the line. If you compress the spring all the way to its limit, it will snap back hard. Russia has its own national interests, and those need to be taken into account and respected. So, the annexation of Crimea, we are told to accept, was totally, what's the word? Unprovoked. Sound familiar? Unprovoked. Now, John McCain wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post a couple of months later, and it was so counterfactual that I wrote a letter to the Washington Post, and it got published, okay? And the essence of McCain's remark was that the seizure, as he put it, of Crimea was unprovoked. Right, unprovoked. Well, you know, if people can't see what is provoked and what is unprovoked, whether it has to do with Crimea or Ukraine in general, well, then they can't see much. And of course, we have already heard why they can't see much. I just add a couple of things here. Will Rogers, the great American humorist, said something really important that applies in spades to this context. He said, you know, the problem isn't what people know. It ain't what people know. It's what people know that ain't so. It's what people know that ain't so. That's the problem. Well, that is the problem. And the propaganda on this side is so thick that it's possible for people to know what ain't so and be convinced of it. Now, sometimes I draw from my knowledge and my teaching of the Russian language. And I'd like to do that right now, just to point out that the Russian verb for laugh does not take a direct object. So even the best English speakers, native Russians, kind of muff it. And when we used to act up in Russian class, our teacher would say, "Who are you laughing? What are you laughing? This is nothing to laugh." Of course, that provoked us into peals of laughter. But the problem is this, that the fact that Americans know it ain't so is nothing to laugh. I'll close with this. We here in Raleigh, North Carolina, are about to be treated to a visit by a former president of the United States. His name is George W. Bush. He is responsible, as most of you know, for all manner of evil, including authorizing torture. Now, most recently, he appeared in one of these places in Texas. He made a little speech, and he didn't catch himself before he said, and I don't want to misquote him, he said, listen now, The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq, I mean Ukraine. Guess what? Those Texans laughed. Okay? They laughed. What do I say to that? What I say to that is that this calculus right now, where most people, most Americans at least, believe what ain't so, is nothing to laugh, nor is the threat of these Ukrainians who put us on some kind of a list. This is nothing to laugh. And I'm just very proud and happy to be part of this program, because I think we are exposing the truth here in a way that Will Rogers would be very proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ray. Now we're going to go directly to questions, and I'm going to do my best to get used to the screen here, but let me go first, I hope, to Marina Zakam. Let me first of all apologize for murdering people's names. Maria Zakamskaya. I hope I got it right. Close to right.
Hello. Yes. Thank you so much. Ms. Zakamskaya is my colleague who did the accreditation for me. I'm Julia Ludwig from Berlin, Germany, and I'm representing our TDE. And I have some question to the participants. And what do you think is the main point of creating such lists? After all, they usually include people who are unlikely to decide on spending a vacation in Kiev, for example, when we are talking about myrotvorets. Is it just for fun, or should this be taken seriously to be on such lists? And then how does Europe view the fact that such death lists are created? How democratic is it to run lists based on statements by politicians and journalists? And why are these lists being supported by the USA? How can the fact that a person is on this myrotvorets, for example, list prevent them from entering the United States? Will they let them in at the border? Will they question them? So what will happen to the people there on this list, for example? Thank you.
Okay, here's what we'll do. I know that there will be several people that might answer that, but before we do that, I want to bring in one other spokesperson on the list, number 2 on the list actually, which is Helga Sepp-LaRouche, since in fact I believe you said you're RT in Germany, is that correct? Okay, so Helga?
Well, I don't want to answer to the question of the journalist from Berlin right now, but I want to first thank all the previous speakers for having said what they did. But I would like to introduce one other thought, and that is that given the fact that on this list, the 31st people have all committed no other crime than to participate in conferences of the Schiller Institute since April. And the issue was not necessarily Ukraine or even the war, but the issue in all of these conferences was the need to find a way to avoid an escalation which could lead to World War III, coming naturally out of the war in Ukraine. And the discussion was how to create a new international security architecture which would involve the interest of every single country. Because clearly, if we go into a full-fledged confrontation between NATO and Russia and, China by association, this could mean the end of civilization. It could mean the end of humanity, because if you come to a nuclear war, then there is nothing left over. And all the participants in these conferences were concerned with that and contributed valuable ideas how you could arrive at a new security and development architecture based on the principles of the Peace of Westphalia. Now, Scott Ritter referred to the fact that this Ukrainian situation is a proxy war. And I would like to suggest that the people on the list are not there because they don't stick to the narrative, which is allowed, the official narrative about this conflict, but because they represent, or many of them, at least those who were participating in the Schiller conferences, they represent the potential of a solution to the present strategic conflict. And therefore, I would say that the whole discussion about the narrative, what makes you a Russian propagandist, is also a proxy discussion, like a proxy war has a proxy discussion. In order to make clear what I mean is, if you look at the long history of terrorism, how it was used in history, many cases were actually targeting people who represented a solution to a strategic crisis. And of the many examples I could use, I only want to refer to Walter Rathenau and, what was the result to all the people who signed the Rapallo Treaty 100 years ago. That was the elimination of a system. Then if you look at the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Enrico Mattei, the same thing applies. Enrico Mattei represented a completely different world outlook than what remained after him. And very important, the assassination of Alfred Herrhausen and Rohwedder in the context of the German unification, which was a clear warning against Helmut Kohl, the chancellor at the time, to absolutely not dare to have any kind of association, with Russia, to go in the direction of, using the potential of German unification to create a new system. Communism was dead. It was the chance to create a peace order. So all I want to say is we should not only look at the the one meaning of what we should debate, namely, what is the truth about Ukraine and what are, efforts to control the narrative. But we should also include in the debate the fact that the neoliberal system is bankrupt, that behind the war is, among other things, the effort to prevent Russia from ever playing a role in world history again, go for regime change, but also to prevent the rise of China. And given the fact that Russia and China have now formed, thanks to the policies of NATO, a very strong alliance, we are really looking at that is the battle, what is behind, and what this is a proxy discussion about. I just wanted to introduce that other question, because if we continue the way we have right now, the danger of a total decoupling from the West, Europe, the United States, maybe the Five Eyes in Japan, against Russia, and the whole new world system which is emerging around the non-aligned movement, around China, the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS, the SCO. I mean, we have to find a higher level of cooperation, and that is what this list also targeted.
Thank you. And let me say, I neglected to say that Helga is the founder and the leader of the Schiller Institute. We had 3 questions for you, Helga, as you were talking, just about why the list was composed the way it was, the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, the first 31 people being from that. We're going to ask that you respond to that after I understand Scott Ritter was going to respond to the particular question. Is that correct?
I will be more than happy to.
Yeah, well, if you would just respond to the correspondence question, because I want to come back to Helga and then come back to the questions. Let me also just say to everybody, there are now a lot of questions, so please try to cooperate because we're going to try to get one answer to your question as we go. If you could designate whom you'd like to answer your question, please let me know. So, Scott, go ahead.
Well, I think that one of the questions was, should we take this list seriously? I do. I would hope that the person asking the question does, and I would hope that anybody participating in this conference does. There's 2 aspects of this. One is the suppression of free speech. And if you're not a defender of free speech, you might not want to be a participant in this conference, because this conference is all about defending free speech. But more important, is free speech a death penalty? And again, it's not an exaggeration. People have died who are on the myrotvorets list simply for the fact that they have spoken out against the policies of the Ukrainian government. So we're not talking about a hypothetical. We're not talking about a theoretical. We're talking about a real threat. And the people perpetrating these crimes, many of them have adhered to an odious ideology linked to a person in history, a Stepan Bandera. And the reason why I bring that up is simply to say, well, Scott, you're in the United States. You're immune to this. Ukraine is far away. Don't worry. Just a few miles down the road in sleepy little New York town of Ellenville is a camp where they have a monument to Stepan Bandera and 3 other hateful pro-Nazi murderers who have a history of slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people, Polish people, Russians, Jews. Maybe you can't get excited about killing 100,000 Poles. I don't know. Maybe there's people whose thick skins don't understand that. Maybe the thought of murdering hundreds of thousands of Russians doesn't make you sick. But here in the United States, we tend to believe that the Holocaust was something that should never happen again. And yet, we are making common cause with the triggermen of Babi Yar, the guys who are responsible for the murders of 30 to 40,000 Jews in Kiev during the Second World War, when Ukraine was under German occupation, and that German occupation was facilitated by people like Stepan Bandera and his ilk. The ideology behind those deaths, those murders, is alive and well and living here in the United States today. I'm not going to give the guy the benefit of naming him. I don't want to give him that kind of notoriety. But there's a former U.S. Navy captain who likes to talk about his support for Ukraine. And in the videos he makes, in the background is an American flag. Guy served in his country. But over the flag is the flag of the right sector, Azov, the Nazis. So here's an American veteran who's allowed the symbol of hate to be draped over the American flag here in the United States. So do I take the threat of death seriously? You're darn right I do. I'm not going to let my life be defined by fear, but I would be a fool not to believe that there are people in the United States who look at the green light given to the notion of targeting Americans for exercising their free speech, the green light given by the Congress through their actions, by the State Department through their organization and participation in these meetings, and by our own allies in breathing life into the notion that by simply speaking the truth, you can be labeled information terrorist, with the emphasis on terrorist and the punishment that that term brings with it. So yeah, I take it very seriously. This is not a joke. This is real. And it's high time that every journalist stand up in defense of free speech and demand from Congress. The United States used to stand for something. We're the shining city on the hill. And one of the key aspects of being an American and what America claims to promote around the world is free speech. Freedom of assembly, freedom of association, free speech. So wherever you are in the world, understand this, that if this list is allowed to continue, if this list continues to be supported by the United States, then the United States stands for nothing. And if you're looking to the United States as a symbol, you're basically barking up the wrong tree.
I want to just ask that. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to come back to Helga. I'm going to announce the next 3 persons that are going to be able to ask questions. We're going to take your questions. And they were Mira Terada, Enrique Box, and Anton Chudakov. We're going to come to Helga. And here's what I have to ask everybody's cooperation. Try to be as brief as you can. You have to say what you have to say. We have no problem. And as long as others are fine. But, we're going to try to make sure all questions that we can get answered. I see there are another 3 people, and we will get to you. So Helga, let's come to you first. So the questions were, how come the list is like it is? Why are you number 2? What's your view of how this was constructed and what this was all about?
Well, you know, I think the reason why I'm number 2 is because we are a factory of ideas. I mean, this is actually a quote from Ramsey Clark, who came to the defense of my husband when he was innocently put in jail by George Bush. And, you know, Ramsey Clark, who many people know, was a very defender of human rights. And he described the case of my husband as the worst case of injustice and law bending in the history of the United States. And he said the reason is that these people, meaning us, that they are a factory of ideas, of solutions. They are the book people. And that is what, you know, the Schiller Institute is all about. We are trying to offer a solution or solutions to the many problems. My husband is world famous among good people, at least, that he offered a solution to the present crisis, you know, many years ago. As a matter of fact, he predicted the present collapse of the neoliberal system 51 years ago, after Nixon took the dollar of gold and introduced the floating exchange system. He said, if you stay with this policy, it will necessarily lead to the danger of depression, fascism, and a new world war. And that is exactly where we are right now. And he also offered solutions, namely the famous 4 laws of Lyndon LaRouche, Glass-Steagall, banking separation, go back to national banking, have a credit system, go for a crash program for fusion and increase of productivity through cooperation in space, and have a 4-power agreement, meaning the 4 most powerful countries in the world have to work together, because only them are strong enough to defeat the real oligarchy, which is the City of London and Wall Street. Now, not everybody who participates in the Schiller Institute conferences agrees exactly with that program, but these are all people who are guided by goodwill to find solutions, you know, to the world poverty, the world food famine. 1.7 billion people are threatened with starvation. We have a hyperinflationary blowout of the system. All the people who participated in the Schiller conferences have agreed that we need a new paradigm. And I think this new paradigm is what has been targeted by putting these 30 people on the list.
All right. So we're going to go to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to see the list here. Myrotvorets. I will, by the way, announce the next 3 persons that will ask questions right after we get this first round. So if she's there, and if she's not, it might have a message here. No. So is she there? Not hearing her.
She's here. Let's see.
Because otherwise we'll go to the next person to come back.
There she is.
Okay, very good.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just probably not heavy. Oh, there you go.
Yes, we can see you. You have an alert.
And as the head of the human rights organization, Foundation to Battle Injustice, I have been working for several months to close this resource and recognize it as a terrorist organization. This is the reason why my personal data was also published on myrotvorets database. The Foundation's human rights defenders analyzed the data posted on myrotvorets, on the basis of which we held 2 press conferences in Moscow, the main purpose of which was to attract the attention of world community to the illegal publication of personal data of underage children and journalists. Moreover, the human rights defenders of the Foundation to Battle Injustice have transferred the collected materials to the United Nations through the first deputy permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the UN, Dmitry Polyansky, and to the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF. I was happy to see today Sonia van den Ende's video. She was talking about press conference that took place yesterday and was arranged by my foundation. I also would like to inform you that just yesterday, the Foundation to Battle Injustice submitted documents to the Federal Security Service of Russia to investigate the activities of the Myrotvorets website and recognize those involved in the creation of this resource as a terrorist organization. We have prepared also an open letter to the UN that's signed by many journalists, and we came to the conclusion that the database of the Ukrainian nationalist resource contains the personal data of at least 341 journalists from 31 countries of the world. We ask all participants and viewers of today's conference to sign it. I will send an email to the organizer of the conference with the open letter. And as a head of the Foundation to Battle Injustice, I'm convinced that only through the joint efforts of human rights organizations, law enforcement agencies, and international intergovernmental organizations, it's possible to achieve complete blocking of the myrotvorets resource and complete deletion of personal data collected and posted illegally. So I have more question, but a proposal to sign the petition, to sign an open letter that I will email to the Institute of Schiller. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. And thank you very much. We'll take that up. Then Enrique, oh, actually, I said I was going to say the other three people. So let me do that now. That is Gerardo Castilla Chavez, Deborah Armstrong, and there is someone that I saw before. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get used to the screen. Well, I'm going to say Walter Fomento at the moment. Oh, Ruben Guzzetti. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. So those are the three after. So Enrique Box, you're next.
Buenos días, les hablo desde Buenos Aires. Me solidarizo con vuestros valientes reclamos de desmantelar esta financiación, entre otras cosas porque yo mismo soy un sobreviviente de las políticas exteriores que también financiaba Estados Unidos en el siglo pasado. Sufrí persecución política, fui varias veces agredido en locales policiales, sufrí el exilio por muchos años, lo que perjudicó con crueldad la única vida que tengo. La pregunta para todos es que junto con la legitimidad del reclamo que hoy se está haciendo, ¿no estamos en momento clave para desenmascarar esta operación sociopolítica? ¿No es hora de denunciar que no se trata de equivocaciones absurdas, de tiros en los pies o en otras partes, sino que en realidad se trata de un plan morboso y genocida diseñado y aplicado prolija e impiadosamente? Porque digámoslo, esto ocurre con una porción de la población mundial que está alrededor del 10% de la población mundial, pero en este mismo momento en Oriente se está desarrollando el Foro Económico Oriental con unas 4.000 personas de 60 países, representando a bastante más de la mitad de la población mundial, que está ocupada en el diseño del futuro, mientras en Occidente sencillamente se está administrando la debacle aparentemente absurda en las puertas de un invierno que será realmente un verdadero desastre.
Okay, so we have that question. Colonel Black, I know you had your hand up before. I don't know if you want to address that question or not. And if not, I'll give that question to Helga. I know she can address it.
I think perhaps Helga, I didn't have my translator on at the beginning.
Okay, all right, fine. Helga?
Yes, I think the journalist from Buenos Aires is right, because, you know, right now we really see the battle between the effort to maintain the old unipolar world, which unfortunately the Anglo-Americans tried to impose after the collapse of the Soviet Union, using a whole series of regime change, color revolution, interventionist wars. All of that has obviously failed. And, you know, there was a big blowback, because without these efforts to impose an unipolar world, I think that the kind of new world economic order which is being formed right now by these countries you were referring to, meeting in the East Economic Forum and elsewhere. You know, they will meet in the BRICS next week, I think, annual conference. And these are all countries who are reviving the spirit of Bandung, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, the idea that you have to go back to the UN Charter, and they are rejecting the idea of an unipolar world. And the Schiller Institute has tried for many years, you know, to convince people in the United States and in European countries that rather than fighting this new system, they should cooperate. I mean, look, we only have one planet. We can either blow it up and nobody will enjoy it, because if it comes to World War III, not even historians will be there to investigate why it happened, because everybody will be dead. Why not go to a new design whereby the United States and European nations, I don't think the EU bureaucracy is capable of doing that, European nations basically say, how can we cooperate to solve the most urgent problems of this world? We have a pandemic which is not under control. We have several countries being in a horrible condition. Afghanistan, I mean, after 20 years of war in Afghanistan, this country is still in a horrible condition with half of the people starving every day. Look at Yemen, look at Haiti, and I could name many other countries. Why can we not remind ourselves that we are the species capable of reason, and we will only survive if we work together for the common goals of mankind? And that, I think, that is the discussion which we also have to have very urgently, in addition to what was said so far.
Thank you, Helga. Anton Chudakov.
Hello, thank you for doing this. I'm Anton Chudakov, this TASS News Agency. I have a question for distinguished speakers. Can you imagine a situation in which this website, myrotvorets, or some its analog or equivalent, would appear in States or any Western country under current circumstances, current conditions? How possible or impossible is it, in your opinion? Thank you.
Okay, so I think that would be, I'm going to ask Colonel Black, do you want to try to answer it, or should I have somebody else?
Yes. Let me say, we did have an attempt to create a very similar list under the Department of Homeland Security. And when it was done, to our great fortune as a people, the person chosen was Nina Jankowicz, and she came across as such a bizarre narcissist that it really was frightening to people. But I think it's important to recognize that there has been a change within the United States and the whole Western world. There is a movement away from the notion of freedom of speech. There's a movement away from the notion that there is no unique truth, and that there's to be a debate among free people, and that ideas will surface after they have been criticized. So if I say something, the best way to deal with it, if you disagree, is you present your viewpoint. But there's a very powerful movement now to simply eliminate contrary viewpoints, so that this global elite, the boys from Davos, if you will, the deep state, the liberal deep state, whatever you want to call it, it is functional, it is real. There is a governing body that rules much of the Western world. And it doesn't rule it quite to the extent they would like, but it is there. And their view is that there should be one view that is promulgated by the World Economic Forum and various other globalist institutions. Those views should be dominant and others should be prohibited. We see this in the censorship within Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. I discovered back a year or so ago, I was contacted by an Italian journalist, and he had tried to refer back to videos that I had done way back at the very, very beginning of the Syrian war. And he discovered that they had gone through very methodically and purged those. So there is this rewriting of history that is very important. But I think it's important to understand, as you look at our willingness to fund the Ukrainian Center for Disinformation, that it goes hand in glove with the Western policy, particularly the US policy, of attempting to silence voices of opposition and to censor the truth. Disinformation is not the problem. Erroneous things that are put out don't concern anyone. What concerns people is when the truth is put forth. The truth is what is defined as disinformation.
Okay, Senator Black, I understand that you have a limitation on your time.
Yes, I do.
And if that's the case, so if you, and I know Scott, you want to respond to this, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do that. But I just want to check with the senator if you'd like to say a few things in closing or whatever. And also, I'll just announce that people can write to you in our chat if they have other questions for you. So even if you're not here, we'll forward those to you.
Yes, I'd be very happy to respond to questions that people have. I just say in closing that some years ago, when ISIS was at the height of its power with the great caliphate spreading throughout the Middle East, they identified 3 people as enemies of ISIS, and I was on that list. They called me the American Crusader, and here it's ironic that ISIS, the great terrorist organization, identified me as the American Crusader, and now we have Ukraine calling me a Ukrainian or a Russian propagandist. So truth is a very malleable quality when you're talking about despots, whether they happen to be in the caliphate or in Kiev in Ukraine. And my objective has always been to seek a just and honorable peace for both sides, to stop the massive slaughter of Ukrainians and also of Russians, which is caused not by something that President Putin did, but by something that NATO set in place with a clear objective, at least from 2014 and forward, to create a situation where Russia's back was to the wall. They had absolutely no choice but to go to war and to defend their borders. And so my hope is that we see peace, and I'm very grateful to the Schiller Institute for promoting the cause of peace and for putting on the conferences that you do. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you very much, Colonel Black. And again, as we said, for anybody who wants to write to him, Q&A, put it in the chat. Thank you very much. Also, I want to announce now we have a few other people who are on the list who've also joined. And we're going to, that's David Pine and Bradley Blankenship. And at some point, we are going to be hearing from them. Let me say also, before we go to the next 3 questioners we have, Walter Fomento will be after, and then Filippo Rossi, and then Liliana Gorini, the next 3. So here's how we're going to navigate this, everybody. Scott has an answer that he wants to give. He'll be short, and then we're going to come back to the questions. As long as people are fine with continuing, we're good, but just be mindful of the time, because obviously people have schedules and so forth. We all know, we all have a lot to say, and we really do. But I just wanted to state that, and I see also Ray has his hand up. So Scott, why don't you go, then we'll let Ray in and continue.
Well, first of all, before I answer the gentleman from TASS's question, I just want to point out that Colonel Black just spoke. He is the epitome of an American patriot. One only needs to look at his resume and understand the sacrifice he has made in defense of the United States of America. And what an absolute travesty it is that this fine man, this fine patriot, has been put on this list by the American government, not by the Ukrainian government, by the American government. And there's the answer to the gentleman from TASS. You said, could we imagine a situation where this list exists in the United States? It exists in the United States. The internet makes it so. Once you put something on the internet, it has an international character. So this list exists in the United States. It exists everywhere. But what makes it even more American is that we paid for it. It wouldn't exist without our funding. It wouldn't exist without the organizational support of the United States. It wouldn't exist without the oversight of the State Department. This is an American list. And now we go to myrotvorets. People only need to look up the appropriate US code on what the definition of terrorism is. Political terrorism. The myrotvorets list is an act of political terrorism. And those who perpetrate it are real terrorists. And the fact that the United States greenlights this, doesn't shut it down. Had this list been put out by Al-Qaeda or ISIS, had Al-Qaeda targeted a sitting American senator for death, you can guarantee he'd have Secret Service protection. You can guarantee that U.S. Marshals would be all over the place. You can guarantee that Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 would be actively scouring the world to shut this list down, kill those responsible. We know who's responsible for this list, and we're doing nothing, which makes us complicit in this act of political terrorism. Think about it. The United States is committing an act of political terrorism, not only against American citizens, but against sitting United States senators and candidates for the office of the United States Senate. There's your answer. What would you do with this list? If America did it, America's doing it.
Okay. Ray?
Just want to make the point, ask the question, why the Schiller Institute is being singled out here. I mean, the first 20 or 30 or however people on this list all spoke at some one or other of the Schiller Institute conferences. So what makes this so unique? Why did the composer of this list not slip in Tulsi Gabbard or Henry Kissinger or maybe Roger Waters, somewhere in the middle of all these people have spoken at these conferences? Well, I think it's very telling. It's because they want to make an example, because they want to attack this unique group. I mean, where's the Council on Foreign Relations? Where's the Carnegie Institute? Where is any unfettered discussion of Ukraine these days in the United States? There isn't any. And so what we need to realize here is that we're under the gun, those of us who have been associated in any way, however remotely, with the Schiller Institute, we're under the gun because we have an alternative truth. We have the truth. It does not correspond with the prevailing government-approved narrative, and therefore, yeah, Scott is exactly right. And so is my Russian teacher. This is nothing to laugh. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Let me say before we go to Gerardo, and I apologize for using people's first names. I shouldn't be. Correct me if that's wrong. I just want to thank people for being on. There are people on from all over the place, all over the world. Argentina's in the house, Switzerland, Germany, Russia, everybody. And we are going to, and it's an international group that we're bringing together here. So just wanted to say that because it's important as we go, and we will dialogue as much as people wish. I will make sure I get the other members of the list, the kill list in, for some things that they want to say. So Gerardo Chavez.
Hello.
¿Se escucha? Buenas.
Hello?
Sí, mi nombre es Gerardo
Okay,
Castillejo.
Drew, I'll be right out.
Soy el corresponsal de la revista EIR en la Ciudad de México. Antes que hacer la pregunta, quisiera hacer extensivo el mensaje que quiere hacer llegar Celeste Sáenz de Miera. Ella es secretaria general del Club de Periodistas de México y por problemas técnicos ella no se conecta y se desconecta su internet. Manda este saludo y el programa de radio que hoy tiene va a estar haciendo eco de esta conferencia. Yo terminé de leer el artículo que publicó la EIR, que se llama La OTAN Global, ordena eliminar a los promotores de la paz. Me parece que es un documento formidable. Y lo primero que me surge cuando lo leí, es que se ha planificado también esta operación de guerra mediática, que lo que pienso es que si Putin ha sido la estrategia rusa ha sido tan importante militarmente para poder contener esta operación de la OTAN, y que hasta donde sabemos, y me gustaría que los expertos militares nos dijeran cómo va este desarrollo de la guerra, pero lo importante es que si este informe de IR es tan contundente, se podría utilizar para dar un giro por completo a toda esta operación de guerra mediática, de desinformación, y yo en particular me gustaría saber si se puede poner el vínculo para que toda la gente lo tenga, este artículo, y saber si este documento puede formar parte de una estrategia para revirar toda esta operación de amenazar a los que hablen en favor de la paz. Gracias.
Okay, what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to ask, not that right now, but Scott, I'm going to ask you to say something about particularly what the present situation is, because it's relevant that that's brought up. And Diane may have something to say more to that question, but I'd just like to go to the next questioner. That way we keep the flow going. Deborah?
Thank you very much for allowing me this moment to speak with you all. I feel honored to be included here. I'm a freelance journalist in the United States. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hey, Dennis, we can hear your translation, so you want to switch back.
My apologies. I have been reporting on this kill list for some time now, a few months since the beginning of the war, and I first learned about it from myrotvorets with the Foundation to Battle Injustice in Russia. And I have to note that I find it interesting that her website, the Foundation to Battle Injustice, is completely blocked on social media such as Facebook. I can't even post the link there to her group, but this myrotvorets site is allowed to operate. And I'm not really sure who to direct this question to, or even if it's really a question, but prior to coming, I have noted that there's a company called Cloudflare, which provides security to various websites. When I was reviewing the myrotvorets site for the article I wrote about Roger Waters, which was published in the Gray Zone and a number of other magazines, I noticed that Cloudflare is providing protection to myrotvorets. Recently, there was some public outcry in the United States because Cloudflare was protecting a site known as Kiwi Farms, which was harassing the transgender community and publicizing people's personal data, including their home addresses. The harassment and threats caused at least one person to commit suicide, according to the Associated Press and USA Today. And just a few days ago, Cloudflare's CEO reluctantly agreed to stop protecting the Kiwi Farms website due to massive public pressure on social media. So my question is, what can we do to make sure that Cloudflare stops supporting myrotvorets?
Okay, what I want to do is, before anybody takes that up, and again, I'm going to invite, we're going to have Scott say something, and Diane's going to say something. She can also reference, if she wishes, either one of them, that question. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to alert the people. Mr. Guzzetti, we're going to go to your question, and then I'm going to ask to hear from Bradley Blankenship. Okay, so Mr. Guzzetti.
Hola, buenos días. Bueno, en principio me adhiero absolutamente a la iniciativa del Instituto Schiller, porque me parece que el camino es denunciar esta operación llevada adelante por los operadores de esta oligarquía, de esta dictadura global financiera a la cual estamos sometidos. Yendo directamente a las preguntas, yo tengo dos. Si podemos tener algún conocimiento mayor, aparte de lo que dice el informe de EIR, sobre la vinculación del CCD y la banda de myrotvorets. Y la segunda pregunta que tengo.
Second question, which I have, is for Mr. Ritter. He said that he has sent letters to his congressman in the United States. I would like to know greatly what answers he has gotten in response to that. Thank you very much. The interpreter would like to clarify that Mr. Guzzetti is in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Okay, very good. So before we go to the answers, it's going to be Scott and Diane. Let's hear from Bradley. Okay, and then we'll take the answer.
Hi.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. I think what the Schiller Institute's what they're doing is really great, supporting us that are on the list. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about my perspective, because I think, no offense to the other people on the list, but I think I'm probably the youngest person there. And so my experience is a little bit different. And before Scott bull rushes me here, I have to say that, just being the age that I am and experiencing the things that I have, for example, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up in Northern Kentucky, which is basically the epidemic of the heroin and opiate crisis in the United States. The experience that I've had seeing how little the United States government cares about its citizens has inspired me to do all of the work that I do now, especially criticizing the policies of the US government. And because of that, because of what I've witnessed in my personal life, the destitution of people around me and so on, and also, discovering US foreign policy later in life, this is all really driven me to a point where I can say that I don't feel like I'm a patriot, that I don't feel like I respect my country. And it's precisely because of lists like this that target people like me and people like Scott and others, people like Jeff. I think also I should note that this is not the first time that this has actually happened to me. Several years ago, at the height of the Syrian war, I was affiliated with a news agency called Al Masdar News Agency, and we were accused of being funded by Hezbollah, which many of you know is a U.S. designated terrorist organization. So that implied that we were somehow affiliated with the terrorist organization. And this accusation was leveled by an Israeli-backed group called Prop or Not, which was picked up by the Washington Post. It was on the international media after this. And I was personally accused of being funded by Hezbollah, which you can imagine, this is quite a heavy accusation. I was also affiliated with Telesur. I lived in Ecuador for a while, and the US-backed Lenin Moreno regime sanctioned our organization. We were unable to get paid, and the police were harassing us, and particularly me, while I was an editor on duty at this building. We had armed guards there to protect us. You can imagine, as a person in your early 20s, that this is quite a scary situation. And shortly thereafter, I moved to Europe. I now live in the Czech Republic, where I have also been targeted for my views. For example, I have called out the fact that if you're in Prague, at one point, the Prague City Council tore down a statue to Ivan Konev, who is the Soviet general that liberated the Czech Republic from Nazi tyranny. They tore down the statue and shortly thereafter built a placard in Prague 6 that is dedicated to Nazi collaborators. I pointed this out in a column, and I was immediately targeted by the Czech media, Czech nationalists, anybody you can think of. I've been targeted by tabloids here, people trying to dig into my life. And shortly after the conflict, Russia's entry into the conflict in Ukraine, I had people show up to my house, a mob trying to attack me, and I had to call the police. This is not a joke. This is our lives. Particularly here in the Czech Republic and many other parts of the world that used to be part of the Warsaw Pact, there's laws in place, for example, in the Czech Republic, that you can actually be sent to prison for having pro-Russian views. And though I understand that this has not been implemented, so liberally, it is still something that can happen. And me particularly being on this blacklist and a foreigner in this country, I'm at particular risk of this. So I just wanted to say that, especially addressing the question from the gentleman from TAS, that imprisonment is a form of political violence. And yes, I can totally imagine, and it is happening now. There are people here in the Czech Republic who have been prosecuted and sent to jail for having allegedly pro-Russian views. And depending on how far they're willing to take this, I could be one of those people. And in fact, I should note that I've been summoned to the Ministry of Interior next week. So in fact, I might be detained at that point. So this is something that I'm dealing with in my life. As far as why I was on the list, I think it's quite interesting. I was surprised to find myself on this list. So I should say that I'm a reporter for Xinhua News Agency here in the Czech Republic, a columnist at RT, as well as a columnist at CGTN and various other Chinese media outlets. The reason I was surprised to find myself on this list is for the reason that they described. For example, they said that the sanctions against Russia are not working, right? If you just happen to be a person living in the world today, that is so obvious. I mean, I live in Europe. I'm seeing the energy crisis here. I'm seeing, for example, we just had 70,000 people march in Wenceslaw Square in the center of Prague, opposed to their own government's policy and demanding the resignation of the Czech government because of their policies. They also said that I'm a Russian propagandist because I said that Ukraine is a hotbed for right-wing extremism. I was on a RT's crosstalk with Peter de Lavelle, and the day after that, I said this exact quote. The day after that was the Buffalo shooting. This is happening to people right now. And I also said, according to the list, that I believe that the world should negotiate with Putin, what they said, but negotiate with Russia. That is a principled pro-peace position. I mean, that is just, if you care about Ukrainian life, Ukrainian infrastructure, the Ukrainian economy, you don't want this war to continue. And that's exactly what we're doing with our policies of arming and propping up the Zelensky government. That has nothing to do with being pro-Russia. And I will also note that on my column at RT, I explicitly said that I believe that the war is a violation of international law. So to describe me somehow as supporting the Russian state is absolutely ridiculous. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So let me do the following. I also want to note that Mr. David Pine has a bit of a limitation on time. I'm going to try to get to him as soon as possible. Diane, I'm going to go to you first, if I can, and then to Scott. Scott, what it was in specific was that Mr. Guzzetti alluded to the question of the war. In specific, there was a couple of other things actually that came up because you wanted to know about that. But Diane, if you could start us, and then we'll go to Scott.
All right. Just as a fellow American, I think perhaps it's important to respond to some of the questions that were just raised by Bradley, because I think the question of being a patriot, shall we say, is also recognizing the ugliness of the assault on the original intent of the United States. That is, if the principles in our Constitution and Declaration of Independence are universal and they are true, all human beings are created equal. There are inalienable rights. Freedom of speech is a right of human beings. And I put it this way because I think we have to examine how our nation has been turned into its opposite. We had a revolution against the British Empire. American founders were very conscious of what, for example, was happening in India. They were very conscious of what was being done to them in the United States. This question of justice is first and in the preamble to the Constitution. And suddenly all of the things that we supposedly stood for in our founding, we have become their opposite. And I think, therefore, the most patriotic thing to do is to correct this. That is, actually, someone who is an American patriot should never allow that the intentions of our nation be perverted and distorted in this way, where we find ourselves suddenly on the side of literal Nazis. And I would also ask Americans to consider there are many millions of Americans who had relatives who fought in World War II, who fought to defend the world from what Adolf Hitler represented. And you might consider right now whether you are acting to ensure that their sacrifices were not made in vain.
By the way, I confused the question there, Scott. I'm sorry. Mr. Guzzetti's question was about your letter to the congressman. In fact, wrote it and what happened with it. And then there was an implicit question from earlier from Gerardo concerning the state of the actual war, something that actually a couple of people have asked about. So if you could just say a little bit about that. And then I want to get to Mr. Pine and then to Mr. Fomento as rapidly as possible.
Okay, well, first of all, real brief about the letter. I published that letter in Consortium News, and so it's a matter of public record. To date, I have not received an answer from either Chuck Schumer or Kristen Gillibrand. I have received an answer from Paul Tonko, but it's not really an answer. It's a form letter explaining how proud he is of his vote for the law that that I believe is being used to indirectly suppress free speech. They didn't address that issue. That's just the reality of writing to your congressman. We'll have to find another way to get their attention. On the war, look, real quick, I'm going to say this. It's probably why I'm going to be called a Russian propagandist, because I don't work for the Russian Ministry of Defense, nor do I work for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. I am thousands of miles away. I don't know. What I am is a military intelligence professional who has made a living off of looking at fragmentary data, assessing it, and trying to come up with an analysis and conclusions. We're into the 6th month of a war. Russia, for the last 5 months, has been on the offensive. It's been a very successful offensive, grinding away at the Ukrainian defenses, inflicting horrific casualties on the Ukrainian armed forces. But like any military, the troops simply become exhausted. And so the Russian military went into a pause, an operational pause. This is normal, where they are going to rest, refit, equip, and redirect their efforts to continue the offensive, at a time and place when the Russian military leadership decides that it's ready to do so. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military has been, with the assistance of NATO, re-equipping up to 6 brigades worth of elite troops, specialized troops with combat experience. They've been equipped with the modern artillery, tanks, armor, and other equipment from NATO. And they took advantage of this operational pause to launch 2 major offensives, one in the south against Kherson, one in the north targeting Izium, just south of Kharkov. Both offenses were large, thousands of people involved, hundreds of armored vehicles, hundreds of artillery, and firing in support. And in both cases, there were localized penetrations of the Russian defense made. I will just say this as a military person. It's possible in any conflict for a professional military to accumulate sufficient military force at a given place and time to carry out a counterattack capable of penetrating any defense. And the Ukrainians did this. They're a competent military. The problem is, once you penetrate that line, can you exploit it to genuine military advantage? And the Ukrainians have not shown themselves able to do that either in Kherson or in Kharkov. They have inflicted serious casualties on the Russians, but they have suffered devastating casualties themselves. And it appears that both offensives have run their course. There simply aren't sufficient Ukrainian troops to exploit the limited successes they've enjoyed. And I think we're going to see in the next couple of days the Ukrainian offense wind down, and then we're going to see the Russians regroup and resume their offensive. Their offense. But that's the situation on the ground. It's terrible, horrible. The deaths are unimaginable to an American. The number of people that have perished in the last couple of days, especially Ukrainians, is mind-boggling. The Ukrainians lost easily more people in the last couple of days than we lost in the entire war on terrorism. I'll say that one more time. The Ukrainians lost more people in the last couple of days than we lost in the entire war on terrorism. 20 years of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ukrainians have lost that many people. That's how bad this fighting is. So that's my update on the battlefield. Unfortunately, this war is not about to end. It's going to be continuing for some time now, and we're going to be seeing similar acts of tragedy transpire.
Okay, so we're going to go to Mr. Pine, and then to Walter Fomento, and then to Filippo Rossi.
Thank you to EIR for hosting this important press conference. I currently serve as the Deputy Director of National Operations for the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. I served as an International Programs Manager on the U.S. Army Headquarters staff in charge of negotiating international agreements on armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas for a few years. And I'm currently serving as a contributor to the National Interest Foreign Policy Journal, and I serve as editor of a Substack newsletter called The Real War. My expertise includes international diplomacy and conflict resolution, and my articles on war and peace have been published or written about in nearly a dozen countries. So back in January, just a little background about how I got put on this list. I began writing a series of articles in the national interest, specifying what the Biden administration needed to do to avoid a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it was really very simple. They just needed to issue a written guarantee that Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. I issued a couple of peace proposals, one in early March, and then a subsequent one in mid-June. And for the one that I wrote in mid-June was a very specific and detailed peace proposal. It was probably the most comprehensive peace proposal that's been issued in the Western world up to this point. And I was viciously attacked by a number of Ukrainian posters who sent a bunch of attack and smear emails against me using all kinds of profanity and accusing me of being some kind of, Kremlin apologist or Russian propagandist. And then in late July, on July 29th, I found out that I had been put on this Center for Countering Disinformation blacklist. And I was accused of being a paid agent of the Kremlin, which is laughable since I've never had any contact with the Russian government. And as well as an information terrorist subject to being tried as a war criminal. And the reason that I was put on that was, again, this peace proposal, which essentially called for the full Russian military withdrawal from Ukraine, excluding the Donbass region, the areas that they currently occupy, which would be subject to a popular referendum on the question of independence. And that represents a deviation from the Zelensky propaganda line, in which they've called for a full Russian withdrawal from all Ukrainian territory prior to any peace negotiations commencing. So that was the reason that they put me on their blacklist. Essentially what Russia's objective is to recreate a neutral buffer state in Ukraine that existed prior to the CIA-backed coup against the democratically elected president of Ukraine back in 2014. And that's why they're willing to give up virtually all the territory that they've occupied since the war began in exchange for a peace agreement. And they're still very interested in doing that. However, as we've heard, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Biden administration combined to pressure Zelensky to break off peace negotiations in early April. And that was a real tragedy for the world because what we're facing is, and the one thing that unites, I think, everyone on this list is that, far from being Russian propagandists, the only offense we've committed as patriotic Americans is that we're all part of this international peace coalition, that we're trying to speak out in support of peace and to save America and the world from an avoidable nuclear apocalypse that could cost the lives of hundreds of millions. So I'm proud to support EIR's call for a congressional investigation for this U.S. government funding for this despicable Ukrainian entity, which has targeted American citizens who support peace, not war in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Fomento, Walter Fomento. We're unable to hear him. We're muted.
Buenas tardes para todos. Gracias por la invitación a ir. Desde Argentina agradecemos y felicitamos la posibilidad de que se haya realizado esta conferencia y formar parte. Solidaridad primero con aquellas personas que han sido incluidas en la lista negra de los grupos fascistas financieros de hoy. Comparto que se rechace la instalación de laboratorios de armas nucleares, biológicas y bacteriológicas en el mundo por parte de Victoria Nuland y esa fracción de la OTAN. Y se sitúe este hecho en relación a la construcción y desarrollo de lo que comenzó en 2014 con el golpe de Estado en el Euromaidán. Mi pregunta, si está Elga presente o quien corresponda, es si el magnicidio en 1963 a John Fitzgerald Kennedy y el intento de magnicidio contra Cristina Fernández de Kirchner e incluso los atentados que sufrió Lyndon LaRouche no guardan relación, no tienen alguna conexión con estos mismos intereses financieros, es que siempre hacen un abuso de la fuerza física y la capacidad de aniquilar a sus adversarios, siempre ocupando el terreno que está muy lejos de la democracia y de la paz. Esa es mi pregunta y agradezco por formar parte y haber sido invitado por EIR.
Well, thank you very much. Is Helga there? Yes, she is there. Okay, go right ahead.
Well, I think the answer to your question is yes, because, you know, if you go back in history, it always was that political assassinations and harassments were used to, you know, basically protect the empire. And I think what we are really dealing with, and I think Diane's answer, what it means to be a patriot of the United States today was very to the point, because, you know, I mean, what the whole world is looking at is that the United States is no longer behaving like a republic. And, you know, the real empire question, that's a long, long history. My late husband used to call it the slime mold, saying that slime mold changes the color, they change the odor, they change the way they look and behave, but it remains a slime mold. And the question of empire, you can trace back to the Persian Empire, to the Roman Empire, to the Byzantine Empire, to Venice. Then the empire moved to the Dutch, Anglo-Dutch location, and finally it became the British Empire. And unfortunately, you know, the conclusion after the collapse of the Soviet Union was that, you know, well, I should take it back, you know, eventually the British stopped trying to reconquer the United States militarily, because after the War of 1812 and the Civil War, they recognized that they could not regain the United States militarily. And latest, with the assassination of President Kinley, and the entering of the United States in World War I on the side of the British, they decided that, you know, it was more easy to convince the establishment of the United States to run the world together on the basis of the model of the British Empire. That has been a discussion. You read what H.G. Wells wrote, what Sir Yandell Elliott wrote, you read Samuel Huntington, The Soldier and the State, which has become the Bible of the neocons after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, rather than seeing the chance to build a new peace order after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they decided to go for the unipolar world and run the world based on the model of the British Empire. So if you want to know what is the common denominator between John F. Kennedy, Christina Kirchner, and the attempt to kill my husband and myself, this was the famous raid in 86, where 400 FBI agents tried to storm our property in Leesburg, Virginia, and it was only a miracle that we escaped a terrible catastrophe. I mean, this makes the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago looking like a children's birthday party. But the answer to your question is yes. And, you know, obviously there's always an effort to CYA, you know, to make it a plausible denial, to not be caught, to have some lone assassin, some, you know, covered operation to make it look as if it's not who is really doing it. You know, but I think that, you know, the cover up of the assassination of John F. Kennedy is really the point where the situation went wrong in the United States, because that if you listen to the speeches, very optimistic, beautiful speeches by John F. Kennedy, and we used some of them in the memorial we did at his 50 years anniversary of his death. You know, the optimism which filled the American people because of Kennedy and the fact that he was murdered, as was Martin Luther King and his brother, I mean, the brother of Kennedy and Malcolm X, and the fact that the murder was covered up has instilled a deep pessimism in the American population, because, you know, once these things happen and you have the feeling there is no place you can go to, you become pessimistic. And right now, the Americans are almost as pessimistic as the Germans. And the Germans are a colony of the empire. So I think, you know, that has to be reversed. And I'm convinced that we need a lot of courageous people who do not accept this mind control and, you know, go back to the origins of what the American system was supposed to be, a beacon of hope and a temple of liberty. And if there are enough patriots in the United States who decide to realize that, the whole world would be friends with America again. So you are at a crossroad and it's up to you to decide.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Filippo Rossi.
Gracias.
Hello. Thank you very much, first of all, for this opportunity. I'm a Swiss-Italian independent journalist based in Istanbul, in Turkey. I would like to make a question about medias. This must not be taken as a critique and as an offense to my colleagues, especially those who were listed in this horrible issue. However, I want to point out a question about the role and responsibility of Western mass medias. We say that the medias are the only pillar of democracy, which should promote and defend freedom of speech and different opinions. However, especially after the war in Ukraine, it looks like they all share the same view, and no one dares to counter the narrative, fearing to be targeted, like in this obvious case of the CCD. And it happened, considering that a Spanish colleague of ours is detained in prison in Poland since February, since the beginning of the Russian offensive, in a European Union country that is considered democratic, charged for being a spy only because of his Russian origins. What is their responsibility in not sharing enough such a dangerous threat and not giving it the right importance? So it's a bit a rhetorical question, being myself a journalist, but I want to know your point of view, knowing that the mass media have played a key role in imposing an official narrative, also considering how this issue has been treated. So almost nobody has actually talked about it in depth. And so how much the information industry in the West is rotten and corrupted. And an active part of this information terrorism, because we can call it like this, and if this issue can be addressed, and we still in time to do this. Thank you.
Okay, my question is Ray with us? Mr. McGovern, are you there? Because if he is, he has a very specific answer to that. And if he's not, we can get back to him about that.
He's here.
Yes, I am.
Okay, there you, okay, great. So you heard the man's question, Ray?
No, I did not hear. Could you repeat the question?
Well, he spoke for a bit, but if you could give him a brief, you'll see, just give him the highlight of it and you'll get your answer, I guarantee you.
Cool, thank you. I just wanted to ask about the role of the Western medias regarding these issues and in, let's say, imposing an official narrative, and how rotten and corrupted is the Western mass media industry nowadays, and if this can be addressed, considering that almost no mass media has talked about this dangerous list, where listing also a lot of my colleagues. Thank you. I hope we heard.
Yes, I did hear you. I am off screen now, but I can answer the question, and that is that there is, as the successor to what Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex, there is now something bigger and much more insidious. I call it the Mickey Mat, okay? You can remember it because it has a vague resemblance to Mickey Mouse, okay? It's the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Why do I say media as if in all caps? Because media is the linchpin. It's controlled by the rest of the Mickey Mat. Who owns the media? The rest of the Mickey Mat. And so if the general purpose is to make money out of war or out of tension short of war, that's what the media does. Now, will the media finally have to acknowledge that Russia is not losing and that Europe is going to freeze this winter without some sort of deal being cut for Russian gas? That's the question of the hour. It will be slow in acknowledging this, but acknowledging it, it will have to do. That's my input. Thanks for the question.
Okay, very good. Now I'm trying to get something which is in the Q&A. Well, actually, Diane, there's a question directly for you, and for Jeff, actually, for both. And so let me ask that question, and then I'm looking for something from a Romanian source, which I have not been able to quite put my hands on. But let me ask this question first, since that's right here. My name is Bernie Holland. I'm a peace activist living in London, UK. My question is for Jeff Young or Diane Sare. In the event that they are successful in their forthcoming election campaigns, will they be able to initiate legal proceedings against Senator Charles Schumer and others who, having taken the oath to uphold the articles of the Constitution of the United States, have, through their recent actions in connection with the Ukraine hit list, committed a gross violation of said Constitution? In conclusion here, can these criminals be prosecuted, removed from office, brought to justice?
Are you asking me to go first and then Jeff, or
Well,
the other way?
we can do it whichever way. How do you want to do it?
Well, I'll go since I'm unmuted here. I think we can't afford to wait that long. This should be shut down really now. And I'm not sure, frankly, one of the big problems in this country is the whole justice system. So I'm not sure that we would get justice. I think it's very urgent that there be a mobilization of popular opinion where it's no longer seen as fashionable to support totalitarian tactics. Although I would certainly look forward to collaborating with Jeff should we both win our elections, then I'll be in the Senate and he'll be in the House. And I imagine we could cooperate on a number of such things.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. Good question from Bernie. If and when I replace the far right-wing Republican in November, I'm going to be very interested in reviving the impeachment process. In general, it has been ruined, almost ruined, by politics. Richard Nixon was almost impeached, and he was almost impeached for the wrong reason. He should have been impeached for not for Watergate, but for pursuing a genocidal war of aggression in South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Aggression is the worst war crime that's possible to commit. And the Democrats at the time, I guess it was 1973, chose to focus on some petty burglary instead of the worst war crime it's possible to commit. Bill Clinton was also a war criminal because of his involvement, his attack on a pharmaceutical factory producing needed drugs for the people of Sudan, and more seriously, his international aggression against Serbia or the former Yugoslavia in 1999. Donald Trump has recently been impeached by the House twice over trivia, where he should have been impeached for war crimes against Syria, Iraq, and his assassination of Iran's best general, who was, Qasem Soleimani was a very effective fighter against ISIS in the Middle East. So impeachment needs to be revived. And to do that, it has to be directed at the worst crime and the worst criminal, the highest office. When a criminal war is going on, the president is the first one who needs to be impeached. So I'll work to establish the principle. You become president, you commit aggression, you get impeached. And then we see what the next president will do.
Okay, very good. People keep telling me that they've emailed me a question. I am not seeing the question. Diane, if you see the question, can you please ask it? I'm sorry about that, but I had an arrangement, and some people don't listen. So if you see it, then you can ask it. I just have to pause and say that because it's caused a little bit of a problem. And it's been going on for the last 10 minutes, so I don't mind saying it publicly. Okay, there's a question that was written, and it comes from somebody from Romania, and I have asked people to relay that, and people keep saying, look in the chat. Let me explain something quickly so everybody just gets it. This is a highly complex process in which many different people are doing many different things, and some people are being stopped from doing different things. So please cooperate with me. Okay, having said that, while we're waiting, we're going to go to Kirk Wiebe, who is there, who I know has a question.
All right, can you hear me, Dennis?
Yes.
Well, first of all, let me applaud the entire group and the discussion that I've heard thus far. So if you kind of step away from the discussion, having listened to it, we are all under attack. We are under attack for simply expressing our thoughts. That means we are in a very serious moment. And so the question is, what do we do? What does one do when one is under attack? Number one, you find people of like minds and you come together. We must form a body. Now that body already exists in the name of Schiller Institute. It is the only organization that I have seen, and I could be wrong. I don't know everything that's out there, but I would beg other organizations of like mind and like spirit and like intent to come together with Schiller and form an even more vocal voice, a more powerful, more influential voice. The cure for absence of free speech is more free speech. We must fight. And I say peaceably. We don't need to get violent. We need to be on the top of our game. We need the best voices we have speaking out. I love Scott Ritter's firebrand. I love his stance and dedication to the principles, and Diane as well, and others that have spoken, upon which this country was founded. We've got to turn it around. We don't have a lot of time. This global cabal of fascists, that's what I call them, fascists, are intent on destroying all resistance that they come upon. And that's why you have this hit list. It's symptomatic of a global evil that wants to control the discussion. So number one, we need to double down. We need to double our efforts. All hands on deck. Nobody needs to sit by and just watch. Become a participant. We need a full court press, which is an expression coming from basketball. That means everybody giving maximum effort to change the game. And so I urge everyone to begin by asking others, appealing to others to join with Schiller in forming the loudest, most effective voice we possibly can. That's pretty much it, Dennis.
Okay, well, thank you, Kirk. Kirk Wiebe was resigned together with William Binney and Ed Loomis on October 31st of 2001 in protest against what the NSA had not done concerning 9/11. I think people are well aware. If you're not, you can look at their various, the four of them, together with Thomas Drake, were also gone after by the Department of Justice, raided and so forth. And were the precursors to what people associate with Edward Snowden and other such things. So I just wanted to reference who he is. Well, thanks to my announcement, I was able to get 5 different versions of the statement. I want to thank Dave, who is the one who just immediately responded, though he's doing some other things. And here's what it is. It says, hello, everyone. My name is Georgiana Arsene. I am a journalist and blogger from Romania. My blog is called In Prima Linie, .wordpress.com. We can put this, it's in apparently somewhere in the chat. And here is the question. Russian ambassador to the US, Anatoly Antonov, said in an interview with Russkaya Gazeta that US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has repeatedly acknowledged that the US would like to have two-way communication channels with Russia, but that meanwhile, congressmen continue to indulge in Russophobic hysteria. What is the reason for this polarization? And how will such a situation affect the global political and security context in the long run, given the conflict in Ukraine at the moment? So I'm going to ask both for Diane and for Scott to answer that. Ray may, of course, have something to weigh in on that as well.
Could we go to Scott first?
Sure. Scott, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I think we're looking at a reality. First of all, for Anthony Blinken to be suddenly enthralled with the notion of meaningful dialogue with Russia, that alone needs to be assessed further. Why? And the answer is simple: the United States is losing on all fronts. There was no need. There was no rush to meaningful dialogue when Russia submitted its twin draft treaties on December 17th of last year. We ignored them. There was no rush to dialogue when Russia was seeking to open up a meaningful channel for arms control, genuine arms control. We weren't in a rush then. We were certainly in a rush to stifle Russia and to impose massive sanctions targeting the entire spectrum of Russia's economy. And we weren't in a rush to enter in dialogue with Russia to try and stop these sanctions. So why now? And the answer is simple. We're losing on all fronts. We're losing on the military front. Europe is bankrupting its military stockpiles, trying to reinforce Ukraine. We just spent an entire summer re-equipping Ukrainian brigades that have been slaughtered on the battlefield as we speak. But that's okay, because you see, we have a whole nother group of Ukrainian troops in training. And so we'll just continue to throw them into the battlefield till the last Ukrainian is left standing. But that's what's going to happen, is the last Ukrainian will be left standing, then he will fall or she will fall, and the war will be over and we will have lost. We're losing this. There's not a military professional around who will say, oh no, we're winning. No, I'm not talking about Mark Hertling, and I'm not talking about Spider Marks, and I'm not talking about any of the CNN and MSNBC sellouts, the former generals, Petraeus. They're getting paid to tell lies. I'm talking about serving officers who will sit there and tell you straight to your face, we're winning. No professional will say that, because they know we're losing. We also know that Europe is about to collapse politically, and with it, any concept of European unity, including NATO unity, which is already deeply fractured. Just on an off topic, we may see Turkey go to war against Greece pretty soon, which means Turkey will go to war against France, which means NATO will be at war with NATO. Yay, NATO unity. So we're losing that. And economically, Europe is just getting slaughtered. Their industries are shutting down, don't have the gas reserves necessary to survive this winter. And I don't believe a single political official responsible for the implementation of these suicidal policies will survive the winter politically. They'll be removed from office. And so suddenly Tony Blinken wants to talk with the Russians. It's amazing how when you're getting your butt kicked, you want to talk to the Russians. Meanwhile, back at home, where we live in la la land, totally divorced from reality, because you see, Blinken lives in a real world. He sits there and he receives the real briefings. He knows what's really going on. And that's why he really needs to talk to the Russians. Meanwhile, Congress lives in a totally artificial world, one where they solely deal, and Diane, this is targeted to the future you. They solely deal, and Jeff, you too, they deal with their constituents. And we have a constituency in America that has bought into the narcotic of Russophobia. I mean, because it's the easiest thing in the world. I want to win a vote, Russia did it. Oh yeah, baby. And we learned that from McCarthyism. It's the easiest thing to do. Gin up fear. Why? Because fear is derived from ignorance, and the average American is woefully ignorant about the reality of Russia. So what are our responsible congressmen and senators doing? They are simply stoking the fear. You saw it now. Lindsey Graham guy from Connecticut, Matt, can't remember his name, but he's a senator from, he's a Democrat. And they're actually both saying the same thing. We want Russia on the terrorist list. They're terrorists. Well, Joe Biden wisely said no. Why? Because Russia will sever all diplomatic relations. And anybody who has studied the history of global conflict understands that one of the first precursors to going to war with somebody is the severance of diplomatic relations. Blinken needs to talk to the Russians, not have any communication with the Russians. So the president wisely said no. But Congress doesn't think right. They're not rational. They're irrational, and they're trying to win votes in a very politicized moment. We have a midterm coming up. So you will hardly find any elected official in Congress saying, hey, I think having a dialogue with the Russians is a good thing. That just isn't going to happen. So that's what's going on. I just want to add one other thing. You know, Kurt wisely, he talked about a full court press. Yeah, I started playing basketball later in life, Kurt, and I'm not very good at it. But one thing I was pretty good at is the military. I was a Marine. And I'll tell you this, you attack me, I counterattack. Because that's how I'm programmed, baby. I'm coming right back at you. And people say, what can we do now? We can file the biggest damn injunction in a federal court the world's ever seen. We need to find the ACLU. We need to find a way to get legal people. Because if you leave it up to Scott Ritter, I'm going to do it. I don't back down from a fight. But I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV, and I didn't spend the night at a Holiday Inn Express. So I'm not very good at this stuff. I will do my best to do my duty to God and country and all that stuff. But hey, we really need professional legal help here. We need a constitutional lawyer take a hard look at the First Amendment issues that are accrued when Congress funds an appropriation bill that empowers a foreign entity to do that which is prohibited by Congress, namely the suppression of free speech. We also need to focus on terrorism laws. And is Congress complicit with political terrorism? These are important issues. And I believe if we frame them right and we target the right people, we can actually get a federal judge. And I'll tell you right now, in the state of New York, they exist. We can say the justice system doesn't work. It works here in New York. And if I, as a New York citizen, file an injunction in a federal court in the state of New York, they will freeze the funding if it's a legally sound injunction. But if Scott Ritter, the legal idiot, writes something where I forgot to do this, I forgot to do that, I didn't do this, it'll be dismissed. Because that's what happens. Even with pro se, where they give you the benefit of the doubt, they will dismiss it. So we need lawyers to step up to the plate. I'll front the damn thing. I'm not a coward. I'll charge. I'd like to have a lawyer look at it first and say, hey, Scott, no, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Because then we can win. This is a winnable fight. This is a just cause. This is what America's about. This is the Constitution, the First Amendment, freedom of speech. This is everything we claim to be as a nation right now in this fight. There's nothing better than this battle right now. So they attacked, bam, let's counterattack. That's my opinion. Sorry to get emotional there, Dennis, but you know, that's who I am.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to Ray, because we have now exhausted the time in much of our audience, although this is fun. But Ray, you go and think of anything sort of as a summary. Then I'm going to have Diane go, and then I'm going to ask Helga to send us home because we need somebody to summarize all of what has happened. So, okay, you go, Ray, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can, okay. Well, there's very little to add to what Scott just said, with which I totally agree. What I would say is that Tony Blinken and Sullivan, Blinken, and Nod are not what the Russians consider serious. They're not serious people. They're dipped in exceptionalism. They come from the finest schools, the same schools that gave us Vietnam, Harvard, Yale, and the rest of them. They don't know what's going on in the world. So if Joe Biden is listening, and I'm sure he is, please send Bill Burns, who knows a little bit about the world, send him to talk to the Russians. It's time to talk before the winter sets in, before our very, very, loyal European lemming leaders start to freeze to death. It's time. We can make a deal. Just have to tell Zelensky what to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. Diane?
Well, on that, I just understand that there were a couple of occasions when Zelensky was considering negotiating and people stepped in. I think in April it was Boris Johnson to make sure that he didn't negotiate, and therefore it is completely on the United States, NATO, etc., to end this. I also, Scott, I'm getting text messages about people who could help legally to get this injunction going, so we can work. We should absolutely work on that. What I just want to say is this question of evil, that is, what kind of person would willfully continue sending weapons so that the numbers of people can get killed who are dying? What Scott described as the number of Ukrainians killed in the last couple of days, equaling what we lost in the entire war on terror. To me, that is really incomprehensible. And I think people react when you say, well, something is evil. They say, oh no, how could that be evil? How could, well, someone who actually intends, who has no sense of conscience about subjecting people to mass death. And back to a point Bradley made, it is a uniform policy. The policies that the United States is inflicting on people around the world, 22 million people in Afghanistan on the brink of starvation, tens of thousands of Ukrainians being slaughtered in a fool's errand that probably most of them don't even want to participate in, but they'll be shot if they refuse. And then what you see in the United States, arsenic in the water of public housing and lead poisoning and fires. It's not different. So the point is to change this, and I may be overly optimistic, but I think human beings are basically good. I think that it is very important that everyone here today participated and expresses a certain quality of courage, because courage inspires courage, and more people will find it in themselves to stand up for what is true, as opposed to going along with this cesspool of so-called popular opinion and media narratives. So I just would like to express that I think this has been really important. It is a badge of honor to be on these outrageous lists, but they should not exist. And I can think of other ways that all of us could be honored perhaps more appropriately. And with that, I will turn it over to Helga.
Okay, Helga?
Well, I want to thank all the people who participated either as speakers or as questioners. And I would ask all of you, I think this program was very encouraging, because it shows that, you know, you can indeed, and I agree with Scott Ritter, that if you are attacked, then, you know, if you are fighting for a right cause, you have to fight back. I mean, this is how EIR, for example, our Executive Intelligence Review, as an independent news agency, came into being, because we were attacked when we were only a group of students together with Lyndon LaRouche at the beginning of the 70s. And we had no power, but we were attacked by the same apparatus. Rather than capitulating, we said, hey, why are they attacking us? What is this? And this is how we have developed into one of the, I would say, best independent news agencies around the globe. And I think it does require that kind of a courage. And I would actually like to give a compliment to Scott Ritter. And while he was talking so passionately, I thought he is really the edle Ritter, the noble knight who is defending the honor of the United States, as did Kurt Wiebe and Ray McGovern and Colonel Black. I'm not diminishing what they are saying, or Diane for that matter, or Dennis. But I would urge all of you, you know, this is the image of America which the rest of the world needs to know about, because, you know, the reputation of the United States in the recent period has really gone towards zero, and that's an understatement of the year. So help us to get this message out. And, I think, we should really have the courage that this fight can be won. And, the first thing is shut down the CCD, shut down myrotvorets, stop funding these illegal criminal operations and start negotiations about ending the war. I mean, what our unspeakable foreign minister, Mrs. Baerbock, just said, she said she will support the war in Ukraine, even no matter what the German voters are going to say. But I hope that the German voters, respond as quickly as possible of getting this unspeakable foreign minister out of office. She's the most incompetent, useless person in this position ever. And, these people are about, and I mean the government of Germany right now, with their absolutely incompetent policies, are crushing the German economy against the wall. I fully agree with, I think it was Ray who mentioned it. We will go into a winter of discontent. People cannot pay the energy prices. They cannot pay the food prices. The system is in a hyperinflationary blowout. And therefore, we need to change the policy. It would be very easy. In the Schiller Institute, we have really since many years, but especially since April, discussed concepts, a global security and development architecture. This is very much in line to, and this was completely independent because we said it first, I said it first, and Xi Jinping said it 1 week later, and he did not coordinate it with me, but Xi Jinping proposed a global security initiative and a global development initiative, also saying these two things have to go together. So I think if we would concentrate on solving the urgent needs of this poor, tortured world, there is so much to do. And are we not human beings capable of reason? And can we not correct a political course when we realize it was a mistake? So in that spirit, I really ask you all to get this program out as far as possible and follow the wise words of Kurt Riebe, work with the Schiller Institute.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Helga. I want to thank everybody that participated today. Also wanted to make sure that I told people that Ray's website is raymcgovern.com. I told him I was going to do that, and I wanted to make sure of that. Ray also wrote a piece on September 2nd, was Biden unaware that human lemmings freeze? And some other things. You want to check him out at that website. I just wanted to make sure I did that because we often do. His son always says, if you don't get it, you don't get it. We would say the same thing about Executive Intelligence Review. Again, if you have either questions, you want to know more about the magazine itself, you can go to larouchepub.com. Again, we'll answer any questions that are left in the Q&A, or I don't know how the chat is working. And I want to thank everybody for being with us. I think this is the beginning of something. Obviously, we want to expand this message and let people know about what we've done here today in order that the task be performed. The last thing I just like to say is that, there was once upon a time, a real honored tradition in the United States of political pamphleteering, in particular. Tom Paine, Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard Almanac, the writings for that matter earlier than that, even the Mathers writings and things of that type. And then later on, the same thing, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution themselves, in one sense, the Federalist Papers, in which there was this great deliberation about how this republic, which if I remember, the United States is a republic, not a democracy, and why it would be a republic, all of this was formulated. This is what we're talking about. Now, that's the American side, but then you had people like Nicholas of Cusa and Leibniz and others. How about Dante Alighieri and his great Commedia and what he did with that? He never could go back to Florence because he got kicked out because of political opposition. He wrote that great poem saying he was a Florentine by birth, but not in character. And he managed to basically, by that way, through the word, through poetry, create a language called Italian, which then roasted and skewered his enemies, but not because they were significant, but because it was important for the people to understand what the divinity of the human nature of the human being is. I just want to say, I think that's what we're really sort of talking about here. That may seem to be a bit far afield, but I think it was important to say it. I had the prerogative to say it, so I did. I want to thank everybody for being with us. We'll make this available as soon as we can. Let me also just note that this Saturday, there is going to be a conference of the Schiller Institute. You can find out more by going to the Schiller Institute site. It is called Inspiring Humanity to Survive the Worst Crisis in History. That'll be 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, Saturday the 10th, Sunday the 11th. So again, go to the site. And if you want more of this, I think several of the people that are here will be there on Saturday. So on behalf of Executive Intelligence Review, I want to thank everybody. Good afternoon.